Hey there, everyone. It's Chris McDonald. It's noon right now for our Timer Tip Tuesday. So this is the part one of a three-part series on advanced timer training for RaceJoy. Specifically today, this is going to be on ultras and relays. So for those of you that do very long distance events or relay-based events, this is right up your alley. And then if for some reason you aren't able to stay on the entire time, or you need to refer back to this while you're setting things up, you can always get back to these trainings. They'll be saved to both the RunSignup YouTube channel, and then you can also find it on the map dashboard within RunSignup. So if you go back into RunSignup under RaceJoy and course maps, you'll be able to find the links to the videos. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the baton to Kevin Lai, who I'm sure if you've ever reached out for any help, you have chatted with him at some point or another, and he's going to take it away.
Thanks, Chris. Okay. So yeah, I just want to reiterate what Chris just said. What we want to do with today's session is really we want to make it as interactive as possible. So feel free to use that questions panel, and if James sees like a question that pertains to a topic that we are currently discussing, we'll stop there and kind of circulate that that question to the group and be able to talk those things out through the group. So I want to be able to make this as interactive as we can through these types of webinars. Okay. So as Chris said, today's training is going to be about ultras and relays. So these are going to be advanced types of training. So we are assuming that all of you guys have a good understanding of the basics of how to set up a kind of a basic 5K and half marathon races, and you guys understand how to solve your basic map anomalies, which are those proximity issues and those turnaround issues. So if you guys don't fully understand those, please refer back to the previous map building videos. But for these three-part series, these are going to be more advanced stuff. The way it's going to work is this one today is probably going to be the easiest in terms of conceptual and setup, and then next week we'll move into triathlons, and then in 2 weeks' time we'll move into more Google Earth, editing a path, uploading those paths, and how that may affect RaceJoy and how to solve those types of issues. So over the next 3 weeks, it's probably going to get harder and harder in terms of more advanced features. So again, for today, not going to do a lot of PowerPoint. As you can see by my slides, there are actually really not a whole lot of slides, and I want to do more demos and showing you how to set up an ultra, how to set up an ultra relay, and the ultra relays also apply to general like marathon relays and everything like that. So without further ado, let's get right into it. So the first thing we're going to kind of go over is going to be how to set up an ultra. So these are, 50 miles and up types of races. So the concept of an ultra in terms of setting everything up is pretty similar to a regular half marathon or regular 5K, right? So the first thing we want to do is we want to be able to import the KML or GPX file into RaceJoy. So nothing has changed so far. So we'll come into actions, import map path, and I have this Blackbeard 100-mile KML file here. I'll go ahead and import that. I'll generate markers at every 1 mile. Nothing has changed here. And so now we see this is what the path looks like. So obviously, when you guys are viewing this, it's quite a lot, right? You're seeing a lot of markers, obviously, for each mile, and this is 100 miles, so you're seeing 100 markers on your map. So what we have done automatically is we actually change the audio layers and the marker layers for miles 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 11, 12, 13, 14, so on and so forth. So the idea is that we only want to show every 5 miles when you're in monitoring or when participants are viewing the map. And I'll kind of talk it out and then show you kind of why we do it this way. So by default, for any races that are 50 miles and over, we set all of the audio layers for miles that are 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9 to these audio marker categories. So you can see mile 1 we automatically set to audio marker 1. Mile 2 we automatically set to audio marker 2. 3 is 3. 4 here's audio marker 4. And for every 5th mile, so mile markers 5, 10, 15, 20, we still keep it at mile marker. And really what that means here is, let me just go ahead and do this really quickly, just so you guys can visually see what I'm talking about here. So if you were to come into your monitoring view, and so this is the view that I was talking about here. So you can see how it's not as cluttered as something like this, right? So, we're still only seeing every 5th mile in kind of our view. The idea is to make your life a little easier when you're monitoring and give you the least amount of clutter on your map. Now, obviously, all of these markers, 1, 2, 3, and 4 are still set up in your timing configuration. So we'll dive into that a little bit later on. But when a participant reaches mile 1, they'll still get the alert that they've reached mile 1, and the spectators will obviously still get the alert that the person they're tracking has reached mile 1. It's just from a visual standpoint, you just won't see those markers on your map. But again, the experience doesn't really change and participants are still getting the alerts at every single mile. So let's dive a little bit more into the timing configuration. So again, not too different from your traditional 5K, half marathon and marathon races. You still want to keep all of your audio pace on and your progress alerts on. So we want to be able to send alerts out to the spectators when the person they're tracking has reached mile 1, 2, 3, 4, so on and so forth. And then we obviously want the participants, the runners, to get those alerts that they've reached certain miles and this is their pace and this is their estimated finish time. So nothing here has changed in terms of progress alerts and audio pace. And so the next thing that I want to talk about are sort of the finish marker and kind of what could happen there. So I think you guys have seen recently that when you guys click Save Map, you'll get some of these map anomalies. So these map anomalies are, we're trying to give you an idea of what could be going on and what's kind of wrong with the map. So, if we look at this first one, marker mile 2 is configured at 2 miles, but was first detected at 1.22. So if we were to go to mile 2, you can clearly see that this is a turnaround issue that you'll need to add a turnaround marker up here between 1 and 2. So again, those map anomalies typically are there to kind of provide you some insight and kind of point you in the right direction of a map issue. So the reason why I bring that up is for ultras, the GPS data for over the course of 100 miles may not line up exactly to be 100 miles. So in this case, this is a 100-mile race, but you can see that the GPS data says that this entire route is actually 100.47 miles. So because the distance is more than 100 miles, you can see that we did add, a 100-mile marker here, half a mile before the finish. Now, obviously, if you're, advertising this as a 100-mile race, you probably don't want the participants to get an alert saying, hey, they've reached mile 100, and you really want them to get that mile 100 alert at the actual finish. So because the distance is so over the course of 100 miles is pretty minuscule. It's only half a mile. What you would probably want to do is remove this marker and then just set up the finish as 100 miles, right? So again, this goes back to our basic training where you always want to make sure to kind of what the participants see matches up with RaceJoy, right? So you don't really want RaceJoy to say, hey, you've reached mile 100, but you actually still have half a mile to go if they're thinking that this is only going to be a 100-mile race. So to remove this marker, the first thing you'll want to do is come into your timing configuration. And once you find this marker, hover over it. And on the right-hand side, you can just click this X to delete the row, hit save. And now when you come back into the marker, you can hit this remove marker. And then you'll want to come in here, you'll probably want to change the distance for the finish to 100. Hit save and close. And so now when you hit save map, we're now going to see another map anomaly. So it says here, marker finish is configured for 100 miles, but it was first detected at 100.4. So this is something that you can ignore. This is basically saying, hey, in RaceJoy, you set up the finish marker to be 100 miles into the race, but we detected that this marker was really at 100.47 miles into the race. So obviously this was something that you decided to do, and so you can go ahead and ignore that map anomaly. And if we look at the other map anomaly here, marker mile 87 is configured for 87, but was first detected at 86.83. So we would have to kind of zoom in here a little bit. So you can see this is kind of your basic turnaround issue. Now in this particular case, obviously participants will just be running down here, coming back up, and they reach mile 87 on the second go around. Over the course of 100 miles, it is okay to be a little off like this. And because the distance is so short, instead of adding a marker down here, what you could do is you could just move the marker, or you can kind of leave the marker there, or you can kind of move the marker a little further down, kind of up to you there. But when a situation like this arises, especially in an ultra, you might have a little more leeway to kind of move your markers around, especially if the turnaround is such a short distance away. It's less than 2/10. So something like that, you could just move the marker down a little bit more. So that's really the basics of an ultra. Again, not much to it. It's pretty straightforward and pretty similar to a standard kind of 5K or half marathon type of race. Something that I did actually also want to bring up is adding a queue. So obviously with ultras, what we see is a lot of these races are adding a lot of queues in terms of general cheer messages or anything like that. And so we made a couple of improvements I did actually just want to show you guys. This is not necessarily ultra related, but we do see a lot of ultra races using the GeoCheer message feature. So if we were to add a message here, maybe at 80.5 in between mile 80 and 81, we'll kind of go through the same setup here, Q 80.5. Set this up as an audio marker. And so the new thing that I wanted to show you guys here is in the past in training, what we've kind of taught you guys is, you can get the distance, you can hit calculate distance, you can take this 80.5, you can copy that 80.5, then you can save the marker, then you can go into your timing configuration, scroll all the way down to the bottom, and then plug in that 80.5 distance into this Q 80.5 marker. And then you would save your configuration and then everything gets moved into the correct order. What we've done in the last couple of months is we've added this kind of auto save marker and add to timing configuration. So what you'll do is you can check this box on, and then you'll want to select the distance that you want to configure the marker for. So obviously, I think some of you guys have seen when you add a marker, sometimes the marker falls onto two parts of the course if it's like a looped course. So you want to pick the distance you want to configure the marker for. So in this case, it's pretty straightforward. We just want 80.5. So if I check this on, click 80.5. Now when I come into the timing configuration, you can see that this cue, this marker gets automatically set up for you, right? The distance is automatically filled in, it's automatically put in the correct order, and by default, we uncheck progress alerts and audio pace. Again, for most situations when you're adding a geo-cheer message like this, or in what you can also do this for is a turnaround point, we don't want to be sending alerts out to spectators and the runners that what their pace is and everything like that. And so that's like a new kind of easier, hopefully, way of adding a additional cue or a turnaround marker there. So I did want to show everyone that. James, were there any questions on ultras that we wanted to share with the group or anything like that?
No, we're going along really well here, Kevin. One item just to kind of outline again, bring up the timing configuration.
Yep.
So again, we're talking about a 100-miler here. That's no small feat in itself, but we are talking about any ultras here today. And so there are ultras that go on multi-day. You may be contracting with a company that wants to put on a multi-day ultra that could be like 200 miles. We had one that went all the way down from New York to Washington, D.C. All kinds of interesting things can happen in the business, as you guys know. So when it comes to the progress alerts and audio pace, very important just to highlight again that line. Always leave the audio pace on in ultras because this is very important for somebody that's moving through all those miles. They need to hear their pace, their split pace. They need to have that feedback. It's really long days for them, and they need that feedback. The question about whether or not to send out to the audience that's participating in that and the spectators is really a timer question. So if you're dealing with something that's really a multi-day event, multiple, hundreds of miles, you can opt to just have those go out every 5 miles, or you can, in the case of this Blackbeard, just a 100-miler, it's a single-day event, leave it on every mile. It's still very meaningful to the friends and family that are tracking them. So just something to outline there. It really is a timer decision about how many alerts do you want to send out to the friends and family spectators. Yeah. Good.
Yeah, to piggyback off of James, if there's, a 200-mile race that's over the course of 2 days, as a spectator, well, as a timer, you want to think, okay, if I was a spectator for this race and I'm tracking my friend, do I want to get 200 alerts on my phone? What we found is sometimes that might not be a good option and a good experience for the spectators. So a lot of times for those multi-day of, super long ultras, we set progress alerts to be every 5th mile. So that way, they're not getting 200 alerts, they're only getting, 100 alerts or something like that. I can't do the math right now, but I'm sure that's not correct. But something like this would be like a common setup, something where, progress alerts is only checked on for the start and then every 5th mile. And then obviously we want those to be at the finish as well. So just something to think about. Now, obviously this is going to be a preference of you as the timer and then also the race. So this isn't saying like, all multi-day ultras, you want to do this exact setup, but it is something to be aware of and mindful of, is just making sure that the experience of the spectators is good, because we don't necessarily want to bombard them with 200, 220 alerts kind of throughout the day and night. So that's something that when you're talking to races that have asked you to set up ultras, is to bring that up and ask what kind of experience do you want the spectators to have as well. Cool. So the next thing we're going to talk about today, as my computer is going a little crazy, is relays. In my example that we're going to walk through today, it's going to be not a 100-mile relay, but it'll be more of an ultra style relay. but the setup itself is going to be exactly what you would do even for a marathon relay or a half marathon relay. So the setup and concept itself will be the same, but for today's example, we're kind of going to be doing, I'll have like an ultra relay setup here. So again, for relays, the same concept applies, right? We want to make sure we get our KML and GPX file uploaded into RaceJoy. So same thing, actions, import map path, and find your relay, KML, and we'll set markers at every 1 mile. And so this is kind of your typical view here. Obviously, in this case, this race is 50 miles and over. So again, we are still doing the same audio marker configuration here. So basically in your monitoring view, only every 5th mile will appear. Now, just to reiterate again, if I haven't made myself clear, we only do that for races that are 50 miles and longer. So if this was a marathon relay, every marker would appear in your monitoring, and your map wouldn't be kind of like this. Would be more like this, where you're seeing every mile. Sorry. So the same thing goes as far as a setup for a relay. The first thing you want to do is just kind of make sure all of your configuration is correct, right? So we'll just kind of go ahead and add all of our distances. And I'm not 100% sure what this distance is. So it is 75.69 is the finish. So we've set up our distances and we've got everything kind of looking all good here. Nothing has changed too much here. So obviously with these relays, the biggest difference is we want to be able to add the exchange locations. And so adding an exchange location is very similar to adding a turnaround marker or an audio cue. There's obviously a couple of setup differences, but in terms of the process of getting a marker added, it is all the same. So let's say in this particular race here, the first runner will run about maybe 6.5 miles, and the first exchange zone is right around this intersection here. So what we'll do is we'll click on the Add a Marker tool. We'll add a marker in here. Go back to the Stop Drawing Hand tool, and now let's go ahead and set up the marker and exchange point. The first thing you'll want to do is make sure you name the marker name. So it's always important to go through and kind of set up the marker first. So let's go ahead and do that here. So let's go ahead and name this exchange 1. Give the same title, exchange 1. Now for the category, this is where it's a little different than adding a geocheer or a turnaround marker. For a category, we want to set this as a start-finish category. The reason why is this is an exchange point in RaceJoy is the start of a new leg and the finish of another. So basically we're saying leg 1 person, leg 1 runner is now finishing and leg 2 runner is now starting. So it's going to be 2 separate runs in RaceJoy essentially. So you want to make sure that you set the category to start finish. Go ahead and select the relay location icon. And again, let's use this new calculate distance kind of configuration here. So if we go ahead and hit calculate distance, okay, the exchange point is going to be at 6.82. Let's go ahead and save this marker and add it to the timing configuration. And then let's go ahead and click on the distance of 6.82. And so now we've added the exchange point into the timing configuration. Now, Again, as I mentioned earlier, by default, we always uncheck progress alerts and audio pace when you're adding these, these new markers. So in a turnaround marker situation, that totally makes sense, right? We don't want the spectators and the runners don't really care for their pace when they've reached the 5K turnaround at mile 2.79, right? It's not a very relevant piece of data that spectators or runners care about. Same thing for GeoCheer messages, right? We only just want that GeoCheer message to go out, and we don't really want the runners to know, hey, you've reached, mile 68.7, here's your split, here's your pace. And the spectators don't really care when they've reached cheer number 27 of the race, right? So that's kind of why we always leave those progress alerts and audio pace off when you do this, when you're adding a marker. The difference with relay and this exchange point is that that data does matter to spectators and to runners, right? We want the spectators to know that, hey, their leg one runner has finished and they've crossed exchange point 1. And we want the runners to hear their splits, so basically their leg data when they cross exchange 1 and finish their leg. So it's important to remember for relays when you're adding the exchange point that you check on progress alerts and audio pace. And then obviously the next bit of setup that is different is you want to check on exchange point for that particular marker. So if we go ahead and hit save for a second here, I just want to show you guys something. Let's see. Doesn't seem to be saving.
So it's very important that we talk about the processing type. So again, as Kevin kind of alluded to, there's really what we're doing here is a very different kind of processing. We're taking a collection of phones and we're collectively putting them together into a team. And the team is progressing through basically different courses, different legs. So in order for us to signal that all this is going to change and that we're really going to go into this kind of like team or relay processing, it's very important that we set that processing type for these events to relay course. And that will let us know that we're in this mode where we're going to be breaking up this course into all these other little courses, and the teams are going to be wired together based upon their team. And it's all going to work together across multiple segments of a given course. And we'll do all that processing, that technology for you if you set that processing type to relay. And then that's the reason why, as Kevin's about to show you, and it was really good that that happened. So I'm really happy about that, that he was looking for that. Like, why don't I have a leg name? And now he'll show that by setting that, he'll have his leg name.
Yeah, there we go. So once I change the processing type to relay, coming back into my timing configuration, check on exchange point, hit save. We now have this exchange point checked on, and now we give it a leg name.
And you can also set the processing type right there at the top of the screen while you're in there. So if this does happen to you, you can just fix it there and make sure you save all your exchanges as Kevin's been doing. And then Kevin, talk about the last leg, please.
Yeah. So obviously, in this case, it's going to be more than a 2-person relay. But for the sake of this demonstration, let's say the 76-mile race is a 2-person relay, and the first runner runs 6.82 miles, and the second runner runs 70 or so miles for just the sake of this demonstration. So obviously we have set this exchange 1 as an exchange point. The last thing you also want to do is you want to set the finish also as an exchange point. The reason why is it's technically the finish of the second leg in this case. So we want to make sure that, it is an exchange point technically. We'll go ahead and save that. And now you can see leg 2 is populated in there. So from a user perspective, when participants use RaceJoy for a relay event, they will be given the option to select which specific leg they are running. So if I'm running leg 1 and James is running leg 2, I'll select leg 1 and RaceJoy will know, okay, this person's going to run from mile 0 to 6.82. And when James selects leg 2, RaceJoy knows, okay, James is running from mile 6.82 all the way to 75.69. So it's super important that once you add all of your exchange points and you've properly checked on exchange point for each of those markers, you also do the same thing for the finish. You check on exchange point for the finish, and then you go ahead and hit save. And now you've got everything set up properly. So the same thing with this particular situation, what James alluded to earlier in terms of the spectator experience for longer relays. Obviously, what you would probably see more in terms of spectators are probably the teammates of the current runner is tracking the actual person who's running the leg at that moment. So again, if this was a 200-mile race and you have teams of 10 maybe running those 200 miles, they're obviously in the support van driving around, kind of being up ahead and kind of tracking where Timmy is based off RaceJoy. So again, similar situation, you might want to protect the experience of the spectators, and maybe the runners that are in the support van, they don't really need to know when the person running at the moment hits mile 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, so on and so forth. So you can go ahead and uncheck progress alerts if you wanted to. Again, if this was just a 2-person marathon relay, you'll obviously want to leave your progress alerts checked on for every mile because it's just a shorter race and those alerts aren't as high of a number. And then obviously you always want to leave audio pace on because we want the runners to have the good experience of getting alerts at every mile. James, were there any questions about relays or anything like that?
No, I think we're doing fine.
Okay, cool. So that's actually all I had for today.
Just one thing we can socialize a little bit again. We're not showing today because we're really showing the back end for map building for advanced training for timers to make sure they set up the maps and all. But one thing to just talk about again is the participant experience. So yeah, everybody is setting up their own phones. They're using their own hardware, and they're basically adding themselves to a team, and they can control the legs that they do. They can flip it out. Literally, it's and I invite you guys to play around with it a little bit on an event, but it's really easy. Like at that moment, if I'm not feeling it and I want to switch legs, I'm like right on my screen. I can choose what leg I'm doing or what I'm about to do. I can change it at any time. We've also done a lot of work in the relay world to let them self-manage. And what does self-manage mean? It means, you know what? I decided not to use RaceJoy tracking on that leg, or maybe I forgot to do it. They can actually go into a screen and enter their arrival time at a given exchange, and all that stuff will come into your progress board. So it's very much self-managed. They can actually type in their arrival time. If they chose not to use the tracking, they can fix their own data, and they can actually change their legs as they go. So had a lot of experience doing these ultra relays over the last 8-9 years. And so we built a lot of bells and whistles for the relay team so they can kind of self-manage.
Yeah, so it's some really good stuff here for relays. Again, kind of how we have always done it with all of you guys is one size doesn't necessarily fit all in terms of how we demonstrate and how things always work out cleanly and everything like that. So if you guys have any ultras or any relay events that you think the setup might be a little different to this, or something is a little different in terms of how the course is, obviously just send us an email at info@racejoy.com, and typically myself or James will help you out and get you taken care of. So this is more of a, I will say that in this particular case, this is more of a best case scenario because it's just basically a one shot down the line. So you don't really have a lot of map issues that might come up. So anything like that, again, just send us an email and we'll get you taken care of. That's all I had for today on ultras and relays. I did want to mention kind of what we have coming up over the next 2 weeks. I know I mentioned this earlier, but again, next week we'll be going through some triathlon setup. And then on the 11th of May, we're going to kind of go through some Google Earth changing paths and reloading and stuff like that. So a lot of things can occur when you're editing a path and you know, if you've already loaded in a course and you have to edit the path, how that affects the mile markers after and how that could affect an exchange point or stuff like that. So we're going to dive more into troubleshooting on the 11th, which I think will be good because I don't think we've really talked about how we use Google Earth and how we fix issues that are a little bit more advanced because obviously you know, races are changing courses left and right, permits are changing and stuff like that. So I think this is really important to kind of teach everyone. So again, that's all that we had for today. Any last minute questions, feel free to put into the chat box. If not, use info@racejoy.com for any questions that you may think of. Kind of if you wanted to sit down and kind of digest everything that was just that we had discussed today. So yeah, that's all I had for today.
And just the last thing, again, Mike, just really appreciate the attendance. And then if you could just bring up the timer dashboard, the course setup page there, just to make this more visual. Again, we try to build content as we go. And then right there, map loading videos. So this is your go-to place. And then as we build this series that Kevin's doing the next 3 weeks, you'll be seeing that here added. So quick links right on your builder page there to get back to this information.
And so I think that's all we have for today. And yeah, we appreciate you guys attending. And like I said, just let us know if you guys have any questions moving forward. But hopefully we'll see you guys in the next coming weeks as well. All right, take care, guys.